Higher inflation and lower growth. That's the message from the IMF's sobering World Economic Outlook for 2025. The report, published on Tuesday, forecasts half a percentage point lower global growth for 2025 compared to January estimates before Donald Trump returned to the White House. This is the clearest indication to date of the damage his tariff gambit is having on the global economy. In response to reports of the U.S. using tariff relief to coerce countries into distancing themselves from China, the Ministry of Commerce has warned that China will take resolute countermeasures against countries that choose to do so. So how to reverse the damage to the global economy before it's too late? Who should make the first move to de-escalate the tariff standoff between the world's two largest economies? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from New Jersey, the U.S. by Anthony Chan, Global Chief Economist at Chan Economics. From Davis, California, by Steve Hoffman, CEO and Chairman of Founders Space. And here in the studio by Zhang Gong, Vice President of the University of International Business and Economics, Israel, and of course a professor that's very much frequenting the shows here at CGTN. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show. Let's talk about the World Economic Outlook 2025 report. As I mentioned, it says the swift escalation of trade tensions and extremely high levels of policy uncertainty are expected to have a significant impact on global economic activity, and global growth is projected to drop to 2.8% in 2025 and 3% in 2026, down from 3.3% for both years. That's based on January forecasts, as I said, before Donald Trump returned to the White House. Mr. Chen, how do you look at the World Economic Outlook assessment?
I think it's a realistic assessment that growth generally does slow down when you have a trade war of this sort. We know that one of the things that the IMF also suggested was that global trade is almost going to be cut in half. So if you have less trade activity taking place, certainly with China and the United States, with tariff rates on both sides over 100%, you basically have a trade embargo. You're not going to have any trade. That means slower economic activity. It also means that prices are going to go higher, and that's one of the reasons why the IMF not only slowed the pace of growth estimates for the United States, but it also increased the inflation numbers, which again is what happens when you have these sort of tariff. Prices go up in the countries, and of course, demand goes down as less global trade takes place.
Let's take a look at the figure for the United States. The IMF says growth in the United States is expected to slow to 1.8%, a pace that is 0.9 percentage point lower relative to the projection in January of this year. And the account says policy uncertainty, trade tensions, and softer demand momentum are partly explaining this lower growth, and tariffs alone account for about 0.4% of that reduction, essentially about half. Steve, in California, are you feeling that pain personally?
I am feeling the pain. Even more, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs import parts from China that are essential to their products, and all this uncertainty makes it impossible for them to plan. They don't know what's going to happen next. One week the tariffs go up, then they go down, then they double. It's very hard for anybody in business to operate successfully when they don't have stable markets and when they can't plan for the future. So a lot of these entrepreneurs have built their businesses over the past 5 or 10 years. They sunk their life savings into it, and they are at risk of losing it. So yes, all of us are feeling it.
Well, John, take a look at these numbers. I mean, half a percentage point off for the global growth and 0.9 percentage off for the U.S. growth, and about half of that is contributed to the tariffs. How do you look at the IMF assessment? Is it accurate, and what does that say about the potential damage these tariffs are having, not just on the U.S. economy, but on global growth?
Well, I think these are very generous reductions of forecasts. I think probably it's even going to be worse. I mean, there are very credible institutions in the United States projecting actually a recession coming in the United States. So, this report is projecting still a 1.8% growth. I think it's fairly decent growth actually by developed country standard. And I'm actually not that optimistic. I think things can even get worse.
Why?
Well, I mean, you look at what the Trump administration is doing. He is, he is actually imposing such high tariffs that's actually, as our previous guest has been saying, is actually disrupting a lot of business planning, introducing a lot of uncertainties. In addition to this, there's also a squabble between him and chairman of the Federal Reserve about interest rate drops. I don't think, with the potential high inflations, Powell will further decrease interest rate, and he's screaming bloody murder and wants it to drop down further. So I think, all of this sort of chaos in Washington is just damaging to the economy. And I would project that things are not going to go any better anytime soon.
Well, the IMF adjusts its forecasts from season to season. And is there, Mr. Chen, is there the possibility if President Trump further pushes down the tariffs, or if there's some kind of positive signs in the negotiations that the U.S. is having with major trading countries, Japan, or even possibly China, that these figures will get better, that the economic outlook will get better? What is your assessment going forward, Mr. Chen?
Well, I think Professor Gong has a good point, and that is that because of all this uncertainty, there is a risk that things can actually get worse. My own feeling is that if somehow these countries come to a common ground and they feel comfortable making some deals, then I think we could avoid a recession. But if this situation is escalated, you can run the risk of a potential recession. Right now, I put the probability of a recession at around 30 or 35%, which is not very high, but it's much higher than the normal figure that you have in an everyday basis of about 15%. So I think that there is risk out there, but I think when it comes to making a deal, I think the United States has talked about the fact that China is ready to deal. China has said that they're willing to deal as long as there is mutual respect between the two countries. So far, that has been lacking. But once that happens, then I think both of these countries can make some sort of a deal. And if they do, then I think we can avoid a recession. But remember, last year, the United States grew at 2.8%. So already we're taking a significant hit. And if these trade tensions either escalate or last for an elongated period of time, then I think that the numbers could get worse.
Yeah. Well, last year's growth was also contentious. I mean, some people are saying the number was really not that strong, 2.8%. But anyway, that's a different matter. We're not going to debate on that. But recently, several prominent U.S. economic heavyweights have actually weighed in, have been vocal about their opposition to the tariffs, including Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, esteemed Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and founder of Bridgewater associate Ray Dalio. Let's listen in.
But what Trump said was, oh, Lesotho, they sell us more than we buy from them. So they're cheating us. That's literally what he said. Literally what he said. Okay, is it completely delusional?
Realize this is not a global trade war. This is an American trade war. So what that means is the 10% tariffs here really matter. It means that what Trump has done is shut America off from the rest of the world.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth.
The current tariffs, the 10% tariffs, probably take about 0.5 to 1% off GDP in the US. If they were to increase tariffs even more, then obviously that's the greater impact, and that would increase the risks of a recession, and that's what people are starting to price in.
I think that right now we are at a decision-making point and very close to a recession. And I'm worried about something worse than a recession if this isn't handled well.
The tariff on the Chinese electric vehicles is 100%. This is a terrible act for most American producers. They're all buying BYD cars at 30 grand. You have to pay 40 or 50 to General Motors. You know what that means? They're going to defeat you economically. You're going to be loser.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go to Steve here. Steve, what's your reaction? Of course, these are the voices that are against the tariffs. I'm sure there is a whole host of people who are saying the tariffs are good, just hanging there is going to be good in the longer term. But what do you think of the points that they're making? Do you think that pretty much express the kind of views and concerns of the entrepreneurs from the region that you have talked to and the consumers as well?
I do. In general, people who deeply analyze this have come to similar conclusions. Most of the business community thinks the way the tariffs are being handled is not constructive. Really, if you want to implement tariffs, you don't do blanket tariffs. You do surgical tariffs that are targeted at specific instances of problems you have. For example, if somebody's dumping a product on your market, you can put high tariffs on that particular industry. What we're seeing are these blanket tariffs, which JPMorgan predicts we will have a 60% chance of a recession. Moody's predicts 40%. The numbers are all over the place, but clearly this is not good for the American economy. And when you look at the people I work with, small to medium-sized businesses, they are the ones to suffer the most. A big company can absorb the costs. A big company has time to adjust. But small to medium-sized businesses, if they take a hit, it can wipe them out. And then you're also looking at consumers. This tariff is essentially a tax on American consumers. So it's a tax on consumers globally, actually. Chinese consumers everywhere. Everybody who imports products is going to be paying this tax. And this tax isn't good for anybody. So in the long run, I don't see a big benefit to these tariffs. And to top it all off, the rationale for these tariffs was that we would create jobs in America. We would bring manufacturing jobs back to America. And that simply isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen because Americans won't work for wages that compete with Southeast Asia. Those wages are 1/10 of American wages, and those jobs just aren't coming back.
One more question for Steve, because you're very much in the cutting edge technology arena. You are, working with founders of AI applications and researchers into the latest high tech development. What do you think will impact? How will the tariff gambit impact their research and development and the entrepreneurship in that regard? Or are they kind of cushioned against the impact, less affected than the ordinary consumers who are buying T-shirts and socks?
Nobody's immune to these tariffs. Look at NVIDIA. They have lost, it was estimated at $5.8 billion in revenue because of the restrictions that the Trump administration is putting on them with their chips. And if you look at America, these tariffs are being levied on goods being imported to the United States, but the US has transitioned to a service economy, service and software. So what is happening is the service and software isn't being factored into these trade imbalances. So they don't really make sense. The math doesn't add up. And the software industry is going to be hit. You look at companies like Intel, like Microsoft, you name it, Amazon, any company that does business in China particularly, but anywhere around the world could see retaliation. So we will see retaliation against our software companies. Already Europe is regulating our biggest software companies, and that could become much harsher if this trade war continues.
John, what's your take on the issue that Steve just highlighted? Is that the kind of risk that China is warning against, software companies that are coming from the United States?
Well, I think Chinese government strategy hasn't been being applied to exerting pressure on American companies. So at least for these American companies operating in China, they are now retaliatory targets. As a matter of fact, the exact contrary has been happening. That Chinese government has been organizing meetings. I attended one myself actually, listening to the executives of American companies operating in China to listen to what the problems they have and try to help them actually. But nevertheless, I think the government in China is not going to stand by not retaliating against these tariffs. As a matter of fact, the Ministry of Commerce has already announced basically equivalent tariffs being imposed. I think you look at the many countries' responses here. China is very unique in the sense that we don't sort of succumb to Washington's demand or rush to Washington to engage in negotiation. Essentially, I think the difference lies in how do we deal with Washington in the end game, that is the negotiation. China cannot afford doing things like other countries have done so far. We're not going to go there and do something as President Trump describes as kissing my ass. That's essentially what he said.
Sorry for that language.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the derogatory language. I'm actually quoting exactly what he said. I think we need to negotiate from a position of strength. At the end of the day, it's all about negotiation. You go to Washington to negotiate. It's the same result. America is not going to make concessions to you if you show some kind of a appreciation, rush over there and praise President Trump. It's not going to help. So I think I think what Chinese government has been doing is exactly right. That you need to have respect. We need to have a negotiation that's on equal footing. You need to negotiate from a position of strength. I mean, America needs China as much as China needs America. That's the bottom line here. So it really doesn't matter who's going to call first. I think it's a technical detail. I think sooner or later, both parties will have to be engaged in a meaningful conversation.
And I think it's very much against common sense, because the current administration in the White House love to talk about the word common sense. And I would say from the Chinese explanation of common sense, you don't expect the Chinese to come pleading for pardon or please forgive me, give me something. Now that you have humiliated in public, now that you have humiliated me in public, it just doesn't work like that. If the Americans are proud people, the Chinese are equally. Anthony, do you think this is a fair point that the Trump administration is doing the wrong calculation, or they're putting up a show telling his voters that, look, China will come calling, China will come begging for something, and this is not going to happen?
No, it is not going to happen. I think it's been very clear that China has made a strong point that they will negotiate, but it has to be from a point of mutual respect. And as to the point that Steve made about jobs, he's exactly correct. I did a study, an article on Substack.com, where I looked at the question of jobs. And what we've seen since China entered the World Trade Organization back in 2001, we've seen that manufacturing jobs have been reduced in the United States by 3.9 million. That's a point, of course, that is made aggressively by the Washington administration. But what is not mentioned is that since China entered the World Trade Organization, the United States has also created 27.4 million jobs in other sectors. So yes.
And you don't hear that talked about on Fox.
But other jobs have increased. And that's what happens when an economy progresses, whether it's China, whether it's the United States, or anywhere around the world. The manufacturing sector gets smaller and smaller, and other sectors get bigger. So it is not a question of being cheated because manufacturing sector is contracting. You really need to look at the big picture.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit also this incredible news coming from the United States that the Trump administration plans to use tariff negotiations to pressure countries to distance themselves economically from China. This is from the Wall Street Report, that the U.S., according to people who have knowledge to the issue, that the U.S. plans to use tariff negotiations to isolate China, and that U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent wants countries to limit China's involvement in their economy in exchange for concessions on so-called reciprocal tariffs. Steve, what is your take? For me, that, for any Chinese, I get that is ridiculous. You don't do that. Steve?
It's
yeah.
destructive to our overall policy. So the US, for the past 100 years, has been promoting free trade. Free trade made the US the most powerful economy in the world, and it has benefited Americans across the board. What we are seeing now is that we are putting countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Laos, you name it, in between a rock and a hard place. They have to choose between the United States and China. Now, ironically, China is the largest trading partner of most of these countries. So if you look at countries around the world, China is the largest trading partner of 100 countries. The US, of 60 countries. The US is the largest trading partner of only 33 countries. So these countries, naturally, over the long run, will probably have to choose China. So I don't see this strategy as benefiting the United States or the world economy.
John, what do you think of this, thinking that the U.S. can actually dictate what other countries do with a third country in exchange for something? What do you think of that? And it's the president, the Treasury Secretary of the largest economy in the world.
Yeah, well, we don't have details about, really what kind of conversations are taking place. Yeah, but I think there are possibly three scenarios here. One is that the United States is talking about preventing kind of a transit trade, essentially to bypass the tariffs on China, go to some other countries, and then go to the United States. This is one scenario. The second scenario, I think, is more about investment, things related to Belt and Road Initiative. Especially, I would imagine, the United States is very angry about these projects in the Western Hemisphere. For example, like Chancay Port in Peru, things of that sort. The third scenario is totally outrageous. I think it's just talking about these countries making a choice between the United States and China about trade per se, and I think that's going to be pushed back by these countries. There's no way that they can cut trade ties with China. Regarding the first two scenarios, I think maybe there is some legitimacy in the first scenario, but the second one is also totally it's not reasonable at all. I think it's got to be pushed back from China that this is a sovereign country's sovereign decision. The United States has no right to dictate how these countries receive Chinese investment, and I think this is also going to be pushed back from these countries as well.
Yeah, let's wait and see how countries react to that, if that is really the case, if the U.S. ever raises it. But this is nothing new. We've had media reports where, for instance, a U.S. ambassador in a certain countries in the developing world would exert pressure on that country to distance itself from China. So this is not new, but I think countries will make their sovereign, independent judgment as we have seen over the time. I want to talk about this coming thing about whether China is calling, who's going to call. We already touched upon that just briefly, but last week President Trump posted on his social media platform that every nation, including China, wants to meet. Later in the Oval Office, when asked about by a reporter if President Xi Jinping had called him directly, has the Chinese leader reached out? President Trump responded. He said, well, you'd think it was pretty obvious that he has, but we will talk about that soon. It's not that important because honestly, we are going to have a deal. Mr. Chen, is there any truth in this? Because from our knowledge, I've heard nothing of that sort.
I think that if China would have called, that we'd be a lot closer to some sort of a deal. So my guess, without knowing for sure, is that probably China has not called and probably will not call until it is negotiated at lower levels, that they can sit down and talk from a position of mutual respect, as I said before. Mm-hmm. So no, I think that China is going to grovel. And in fact, to that other point that you made a little bit earlier, with regard to the United States putting pressure on other countries, China has already made it very clear that if they find that other countries are making those kinds of deals, China will retaliate themselves and essentially have those countries pay a price. So just because the United States is doing it, if China is also saying they're going to do the same thing, these countries are going to realize that it's not in their interest to make any secret deals with the United States in the hope of getting a better deal on the tariffs, because it's going to cost them on the other side.
Still, I don't get the sense that it is China that should be calling, and this is not a thing that China started. It is, a move that the United States started, basically a second tariff war that the U.S. has launched on China. Steve, it is my feeling that China will not be making the call. If anybody is waiting, they'll be waiting for a very long time. Steve, what is your take?
That's why we're waiting, because both sides don't want to make that call. Nobody, Trump wants to show he's the most powerful person in the world. So I don't think he's going to be picking up the phone. And, China has a long history with Western countries trying to dominate it. So I don't think China will be making that call either anytime soon. The best we can hope for is back-channel negotiations.
John, what is your take? Because U.S. Treasury, Scott Bassett, Treasury Secretary, has said in a Tuesday speech that the ongoing tariff showdown against China is unsustainable, and he expects a de-escalation in the trade war between the world's two largest economies. But in a private speech in Washington at JPMorgan Chase, he also said that talks between the United States and China had yet to formally start. What can we expect to come soon? Who is going to call whom? How will this be resolved? I mean, eventually, not just for the two countries, but for the world economy, there's got to be a way out of this standoff.
I remember China's Ministry of Commerce spokesperson already said, he used the old Chinese saying, those who tie the knot should untie it. This whole thing is started by Washington, and they imposed tariff on China first. So if they want to de-escalate, the person who escalated in the first place should de-escalate first. So I think, but anyway, I think these are all sort of techno details. The two biggest economies, the two big powers, don't have to be, getting to this kind of an impasse.
Kind of a child's game, right?
Well, it's like a playground, kindergarten playground play. I would suggest set up a meeting on Zoom and both sides log on at the same time. As long as it's not on Signal. Let me say it's not on Signal. It's okay. Arrange a Zoom meeting and they log on at the same time. Maybe that's a solution that both sides can.
Well, accept. It sounds funny. It sounds funny, and we're giggling here. But as I said, half a percentage point of the U.S. economy affected by tariff, as estimated by the IMF. The global economy wiped off by about 5%, half a percentage point. If you use the calculation of 2020 figures, that is half a percentage point of $85 trillion. That's 420 billion US dollars. That's not a kid's game, and I don't think we should be playing with that. It's a lot of people's livelihood at stake here. So I think China really hope that adults come back to the room and we can resolve this quickly, but in a sustainable way. I have to wrap up there. Many thanks to my guests, Anthony Chen, Steve Hoffman, and John Gong. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.